History is a tangled mess of grand plans, desperate gambles, and whispered deals. Often, it is not armies clashing on battlefields, but a quiet conversation in a gilded hall that truly changes everything. The Medici, a family that rose from bankers to rulers of Florence, and then to popes and queens, mastered this secret art. Their story is packed with power moves and high stakes, influencing kings, emperors, and entire nations. Forget what you think, about old Europe. These are the moments the Medici truly pulled the strings, turning the tide of history with cunning and cash. Number 6. The Grand Duke's tightrope walk in a war-torn Europe. The air in Florence in the 1630s was different. It was not just the scent of cypress trees and Arno River mist. It carried a faint, unsettling hum of distant war. Europe was a giant chessboard, and the 30 Years' War was tearing it apart. Kingdoms bled, alliances shattered, and the Grand Duchy of Tuscany, ruled by Ferdinando II de' Medici, found itself caught in a treacherous crossfire. Ferdinando was young, not yet 30, when the full weight of this colossal conflict bore down on his shoulders. His father, Cosimo II, had left him with a delicate balance, and now Ferdinando had to navigate a landscape dominated by the titanic struggles between the Habsburgs and the Bourbons. Tuscany, while prosperous, was not a military juggernaut. Its strength lay in its finance, its culture, and its strategic position in Italy. Ferdinando knew that survival meant playing a careful game of neutrality, a game where one wrong move could invite invasion or ruinous debts. His diplomacy was less about grand conquests and more about subtle maneuvers, about keeping Florence safe while the world burned around it. The main players were Emperor Ferdinand II of the Holy Roman Empire, a devout Catholic eager to crush Protestantism and assert Habsburg dominance, and King Louis XIII of France, advised by the formidable Cardinal Richelieu, who aimed to undermine Habsburg power, even if it meant allying with Protestant states. Spain, too, a branch of the Habsburg family, cast a long shadow over Italy. One of Ferdinando's early tests came with the War of the Mantuan Succession, a local Italian conflict that threatened to pull Tuscany into the larger European whirlpool. When the Gonzaga Duke of Mantua died without a direct heir, a dispute erupted over who should inherit. The emperor supported one candidate, the French another. Mantua and its fortress, Casale, were strategically vital. The French and imperial armies were marching across northern Italy, and Tuscany lay uncomfortably close. Ferdinando's diplomatic corps, led by trusted advisors, worked tirelessly to avoid taking sides, even as both factions pressed for support or passage. Letters from the Florentine chancery from this period show a frantic effort to avoid any formal commitment. One dispatch, dated early 1629, described an imperial envoy's demands for supplies in transit, met with polite but firm refusals that cited Tuscany's ancient neutrality and commitment to peace. The papacy, under Urban VIII, a former Florentine ambassador named Maffeo Barberini, also played a complex role. Urban VIII, though technically a spiritual leader, was deeply involved in temporal politics, often leaning towards France, much to the emperor's frustration. This complicated Ferdinando's position. As a Catholic ruler, he had to respect the Pope, but as a sovereign prince, he also had to consider the emperor's power. Ferdinando's envoys to Rome had the unenviable task of maintaining good relations with a pope who was increasingly at odds with the most powerful Catholic ruler in Europe. Records from the Vatican archives indicate that Medici agents in Rome frequently relayed information about papal French discussions to Florence, allowing Ferdinando to anticipate diplomatic shifts. And marriage was another tool in Ferdinando's diplomatic arsenal, though not always successful. His own marriage to Vittoria della Rovere, a princess from the Duchy of Urbino, had consolidated Medici influence in central Italy. But for his siblings, prospects were often tied to larger European games. His sister, Margherita de' Medici, was eventually married to Odardo Farnese, Duke of Parma, another Italian prince who was notoriously pro-French. This marriage, while seemingly a regional matter, subtly tilted the balance of power in central Italy. A diplomatic correspondence from 1628 and 1629 detailing the negotiations revealed the intense pressure from both French and imperial agents to secure alliances through these unions. Ferdinando had to weigh the benefits of a powerful family connection against the risk of alienating a greater power. He was always careful to ensure that no single marriage would compromise his overall neutrality. The economic strain of the 30 Years' War also required Ferdinando's careful attention. Trade routes were disrupted, and the traditional flow of goods and money across Europe was interrupted. Tuscany, a major banking and trading hub, felt the pinch. Ferdinando's diplomatic efforts also extended to protecting Florentine merchants and their assets abroad. When his ambassadors in places like London, Paris, and Madrid regularly petitioned foreign courts for compensation for seized goods or for safe passage for Florentine ships. A report from the Florentine ambassador in Madrid in 1635 describes a lengthy negotiation with the Spanish Royal Council regarding a shipment of silks confiscated in Sicily, a testament to the persistent, often unnoticed diplomatic work that kept the economy afloat. While Ferdinando's neutrality was not born of weakness, but of a pragmatic understanding of Tuscany's place in the grand scheme. He understood that direct military involvement would be ruinous. Instead, he sought to be a trusted intermediary, a safe harbor, and a source of intelligence. His court became known for its intellectual vibrancy, attracting scholars and artists, a subtle form of soft power. He was known for his interest in science, famously hosting Galileo Galilei. While Galileo's trials were a separate internal matter, the presence of such a renowned figure at the Medici court burnished Florence's image as a center of enlightenment, an attractive proposition for diplomats and intellectuals from all corners of Europe. The Peace of Westphalia in 1648, which finally ended the 30 Years' War, saw Tuscany emerge largely unscathed, a testament to Ferdinando's cautious and persistent diplomacy. His envoys were present at the lengthy peace negotiations, ensuring Florentine interests were not overlooked, even if they were not at the forefront of the discussions. The records from the peace conference show Florentine representatives meticulously documenting the terms and their implications for Italian states. While not a signatory power, Tuscany's survival and stability through this period of unprecedented European conflict was a quiet triumph of Medici diplomacy, a testament to the Grand Duke's ability to navigate the complex web of power politics with skill and foresight. It was a strategy not of bold strokes, but of countless small, precise adjustments, like a tightrope walker keeping balance above a roaring chasm. Number 5, Maria de' Medici's ascent to the French throne and her turbulent regency. The year was 1600. The magnificent city of Florence buzzed with an extraordinary excitement. Not just any wedding was about to take place, but one that would link the illustrious Medici family, once mere bankers, directly to the mighty Bourbon dynasty of France. Maria de' Medici, Grand Duchess of Tuscany's daughter, was set to marry King Henri IV of France. This was no ordinary love match, it was a masterstroke of Medici diplomacy years in the making. Ferdinando I, Maria's uncle and the Grand Duke of Tuscany, had meticulously orchestrated this alliance, seeing it as the ultimate elevation for his family. For Henri IV, recently converted to Catholicism to secure his throne, a wealthy Catholic bride was essential, and Maria came with an astonishing dowry of 600,000 crowns, a fortune that would help him repay France's colossal debts. The wedding itself was a spectacle of Florentine opulence. Held in the magnificent Palazzo Pitti, a lavish temporary structure was erected for the occasion. The celebrations included elaborate masques, banquets, and fireworks, showcasing Medici wealth and artistic flair to a parade of foreign dignitaries. After the proxy wedding in Florence, where the king's representative stood in for him, Maria embarked on a grand journey across the Alps to Marseille. Her arrival in France was greeted with fanfare, a powerful symbol of the new alliance. Contemporary accounts describe the enthusiasm of the French populace, eager for a stable queen and a new heir. Maria's early years in France were a delicate dance. She was a foreign queen in a bustling, often fractious court. Henri IV, a seasoned warrior and politician, was known for his many mistresses and a certain casualness about court etiquette. Maria, raised in the formal, culturally refined Medici court, had to adapt. She brought with her a retinue of Florentine advisors and ladies-in-waiting, many of whom formed a strong, loyal circle around her. These individuals, though often viewed with suspicion by the French nobility, served as her eyes and ears, providing her with intelligence and acting as informal diplomatic channels back to Florence. Letters exchanged between Maria and her uncle, Ferdinando, the first reveal a continuous stream of advice and information, highlighting the ongoing Medici involvement in her integration into French court life. The birth of her first son, the future Louis XIII, in 1601, solidified Maria's position immensely. Having provided a male heir, she secured her role as queen and the future of the Bourbon dynasty. This was a critical diplomatic success in itself, as it removed any lingering doubts about the succession. However, Maria's true test of diplomatic skill came after the assassination of Henri IV in 1610. Suddenly, the queen became regent for her young son, Louis XIII. This was an unprecedented moment for a foreign-born queen in France, and it thrust Maria into the volatile world of high politics. Her regency was marked by immediate challenges. The powerful French nobility, who had been kept in check by Henri IV's strong hand, sensed an opportunity to regain influence. Maria, advised by her Italian confidants, most notably Concino Concini and his wife Leonora Dori, struggled to maintain control. Her foreign policy initially aimed to reverse Henri IV's anti-Habsburg stance, favoring rapprochement with Spain. This was a significant shift. Henri IV had been building alliances against the Habsburgs, particularly with Protestant German princes. Maria, influenced by her Catholic upbringing and her Italian advisors, began negotiating double marriage alliances with Spain. Louis XIII would marry Anne of Austria, a Spanish Habsburg princess, and Maria's daughter Elizabeth would marry the future Philip IV of Spain. These negotiations, detailed in diplomatic correspondence from 1611 to 1615, were highly controversial in France, alienating many of the Protestant nobility and those who favored an anti-Habsburg foreign policy. The signing of the Franco-Spanish marriage treaties in 1615 was a diplomatic triumph for Maria, consolidating Catholic alliances and, she hoped, securing peace. However, it also fueled resentment among the French nobility, who viewed it as a betrayal of Henri IV's policies and an overreach of foreign influence. These marriages, while achieving their immediate diplomatic goal of rapprochement, also contributed to the internal instability of her regency. Maria's handling of the Edict of Nantes, which granted rights to French Protestant Huguenots, also reflected her attempts to navigate religious and political divides. While she affirmed the edict, her pro-Catholic leanings and Spanish alliances often led to suspicions among the Protestant faction. She convened the Estates General in 1614, a gathering of representatives from the three orders of French society. This was an attempt to gain consensus and legitimacy, but it ultimately failed to resolve the deep divisions within the kingdom. Records from the Estates General indicate fervent debates over royal authority and foreign policy, with Maria's regency facing intense scrutiny. The rising influence of her Italian favorites, particularly Concini, further alienated the French nobility and even her own son. Concini's rapid accumulation of titles and wealth was viewed as scandalous. Louis XIII, once he came of age, resented his mother's control and the dominance of her Italian advisors. The eventual assassination of Concini in 1617, orchestrated by Louis XIII's own advisors, marked the end of Maria's effective regency. She was exiled from court, though she continued to exert influence, often through clandestine diplomatic channels. Maria's later life was a complex series of attempts to regain power, reconciliation, and subsequent renewed conflict with her son. She eventually fled France and spent her final years in exile, relying on her Medici family connections for financial support. Her diplomatic legacy was a mixed bag. She successfully secured France's future through a royal heir and forged powerful marriage alliances with Spain, shifting French foreign policy for a time. However, her reliance on Italian advisors and her inability to fully integrate into the French political landscape led to significant internal instability and ultimately her downfall. Her story highlights the immense challenges faced by royal women who wielded power in a foreign land, balancing dynastic ambition, personal loyalty, and the turbulent currents of European diplomacy. Her journey from the grandeur of Florence to the corridors of French power was a testament to Medici ambition, but also a cautionary tale about the perils of holding power without full domestic support. Number 4, Catherine de' Medici, a Florentine princess, becomes Queen of France. The year is 1533. The vibrant city of Marseille, France, is buzzing with an almost unbelievable excitement. A diplomatic event of monumental proportions is about to unfold. Pope Clement VII, born Giulio de' Medici, is arriving by galley ship, not just for a visit, but to personally orchestrate the marriage of his niece, Catherine de' Medici, to Henri, Duke of Orleans, the second son of King Francis I of France. This was no mere wedding, it was a grand strategic maneuver designed to elevate the Medici family to unprecedented heights and to secure the papacy's position in a shifting European landscape. Catherine, a mere 14 years old, was a prize in this high-stakes game. Orphaned at a young age, she had been raised in Florence and Rome under the watchful eye of her powerful uncle Clement VII. She was not known for her beauty, but she carried the immense wealth of the Medici dowry, and more importantly, the prestige of the papacy. For Francis I, this marriage was a bold stroke against his arch-rival, Emperor Charles V. By allying with the Pope, Francis hoped to create a powerful counterweight to Habsburg dominance in Italy and beyond. The French court, though initially skeptical of the merchant's daughter from Florence, understood the political implications of this union. The meeting in Marseille was a carefully choreographed spectacle. Clement VII arrived with a magnificent retinue showcasing papal splendor. Francis I, renowned for his love of grandeur, reciprocated with lavish hospitality. The wedding ceremony itself was held with immense pomp and circumstance, symbolizing the new alliance between France and the papacy. Contemporary accounts describe the detailed preparations, the elaborate banquets, and the diplomatic discussions that took place alongside the festivities. These conversations, conducted by Clement VII himself, were as important as the marriage vows. They focused on securing military aid for France, consolidating papal influence in Italy, and isolating Emperor Charles V. Letters from the French court to their envoys in Rome detail the delicate negotiations over the exact terms of the alliance, showcasing the meticulous planning behind this diplomatic event. Catherine's arrival in France was the beginning of a long and challenging journey. She was, first and foremost, a pawn in a much larger game. Her early years at the French court were difficult. Her husband Henri paid her little attention, preferring his mistress, Diane de Poitiers. Catherine also faced the immense pressure of producing an heir, a task that proved elusive for the first 10 years of her marriage. Without an heir, her position was precarious, and the value of the Medici alliance could be questioned. This constant pressure, detailed in historical documents of the period, highlights the immediate diplomatic purpose of the marriage, a continuation of the Valois dynasty. The sudden death of her brother-in-law in 1536 unexpectedly made her husband the Dauphin heir to the French throne. This elevated Catherine's status significantly. When Francis I died in 1547, Henri became King Henri II, and Catherine became Queen of France. This was the ultimate realization of Clement VII's diplomatic gamble, elevating a Medici woman to the highest position in one of Europe's most powerful kingdoms. However, Catherine's influence as queen was limited by Henri II's deep devotion to Diane de Poitiers. She remained in the background, a silent observer, learning the intricacies of French court politics. This period, often seen as one of personal hardship, was also a vital training ground for her future role. She developed a keen understanding of the various factions, the ambitions of the nobles, and the subtle currents of power. Historians note that her quiet observation during these years allowed her to build a vast network of informants and loyalists, a silent diplomatic corps of her own. The accidental death of Henri II in 1559 catapulted Catherine into a position of immense power. Her eldest son, Francis II, was a sickly teenager, and after his death barely a year later, her second son, Charles IX, ascended the throne at the age of 10. This made Catherine regent of France. This was the moment she truly began to exert her diplomatic genius, not as a representative of the papacy or Florence, but as the de facto ruler of France. France at this time was tearing itself apart in the wars of religion between Catholics and Protestants Huguenots. Catherine's diplomatic efforts were primarily focused on maintaining stability, preserving the Valois monarchy, and preventing civil war from escalating into a full-blown European conflict. She attempted a policy of religious toleration, seeking a middle ground between the warring factions. She convened conferences and colloquies like the Colloquy of Poissy in 1561, bringing together Catholic and Protestant theologians to find common ground. While these efforts ultimately failed to achieve lasting peace, they demonstrate her pragmatic approach to diplomacy. Her records from these meetings show her active participation attempting to mediate deep theological and political divides. She also pursued a policy of marital diplomacy, attempting to secure alliances and peace through strategic marriages for her children. She tried to marry her daughter Elizabeth to Don Carlos of Spain to solidify relations with the powerful Habsburgs. Another daughter, Marguerite, was married to Henri of Navarre, a leading Protestant prince, in an attempt to reconcile the Catholic and Protestant factions. This marriage, intended as a grand act of reconciliation, tragically preceded the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 1572, an event that remains a dark stain on her legacy and a monumental diplomatic failure. The massacre, which saw thousands of Huguenots slaughtered, shattered her policy of religious toleration and plunged France deeper into civil war. Letters from the period expressed shock and condemnation from other European courts, highlighting the diplomatic fallout. Despite this catastrophic event, Catherine continued her diplomatic efforts, maneuvering between factions, trying to maintain royal authority. She traveled tirelessly across France, conducting court on the move, meeting with powerful nobles and foreign ambassadors, always trying to broker peace and consolidate the monarchy's power. Her letters reveal a shrewd and determined political mind, constantly seeking information and devising strategies. She maintained a vast network of correspondence across Europe, staying informed about the political currents in England, Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, and the various Italian states. Catherine de' Medici's journey from a Florentine merchant's daughter to Queen Regent of France was a remarkable display of diplomatic resilience and political acumen. Though her reign was marked by conflict and tragedy, her relentless efforts to preserve the French monarchy and navigate the treacherous waters of the wars of religion profoundly shaped the course of French history. Her legacy is complex, but her role as a powerful female diplomat and ruler in a male-dominated world is undeniable, a testament to the enduring influence of the Medici family far beyond the borders of Florence. Number 3. Pope Clement VII's shifting sands and the sack of Rome. The Vatican in the 1520s was not just the spiritual heart of Christendom, it was a geopolitical powerhouse, a player in the grand game of European empires. And at its head sat Pope Clement VII, born Giulio de' Medici, a man whose papacy would be defined by an intense, often desperate diplomatic struggle against the overwhelming might of Emperor Charles V. Clement inherited a deeply unstable situation, caught between the ambitions of the two most powerful rulers in Europe, Charles V, ruler of Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, and vast territories in the New World, and King Francis I of France, who constantly sought to expand his influence in Italy. Clement's goal, inherited from his cousin and predecessor Leo X, was to preserve the independence of the Papal States and, if possible, to secure the Medici family's hold on Florence. Clement VII's diplomatic strategy was one of constant, often bewildering shifts in alliance. He aimed to play Charles V and Francis I against each other, hoping to prevent either from becoming too dominant in Italy. Early in his pontificate, Clement initially aligned with Charles V, believing the emperor offered the best protection for his temporal interests. This alliance led to the imperial victory over the French at the Battle of Pavia in 1525, a devastating defeat for Francis I, who was captured by imperial forces. This outcome, however, immediately created a new problem for Clement. With France weakened, Charles V's power in Italy became dangerously unchecked. Letters from Vatican officials to their agents in various European courts from early 1525 express growing concern about the emperor's increasingly assertive stance in Italy. Realizing his miscalculation, Clement VII began to subtly pivot. He secretly began negotiations with a coalition of Italian states, including Venice, Milan, and Florence, and even with the Ottoman Empire, to form a league against Charles V. This culminated in the formation of the League of Cognac in 1526, with the aim of expelling imperial forces from Italy and restoring the balance of power. This was a bold diplomatic gamble, a direct challenge to the emperor. Contemporary accounts from the imperial court reveal Charles V's fury upon learning of Clement's perceived betrayal. Charles V, however, was not one to be easily outmaneuvered. His armies, a mix of Spanish, German, and Italian mercenaries, were formidable. Many of them were Lutheran, deeply resentful of the papacy and eager for plunder. As the League of Cognac struggled to mount an effective challenge, an imperial army led by the Duke of Bourbon began marching south through Italy, largely unpaid and living off the land. Clement VII, relying on his diplomatic efforts to protect Rome, drastically underestimated the immediate threat. He dismissed his own Swiss guards, believing he had secured a truce with imperial commanders. This was a catastrophic diplomatic miscalculation detailed in numerous historical records from Rome at the time. On May 6, 1527, the imperial army reached the walls of Rome. Despite the Duke of Bourbon's death in the initial assault, the leaderless troops stormed the city. What followed was the infamous sack of Rome, an event that shocked all of Europe. For 8 months, the Eternal City was subjected to a brutal and systematic pillaging. Churches were desecrated, palaces ransacked, and countless civilians killed or tortured. Pope Clement VII himself was besieged in Castel Sant'Angelo, narrowly escaping capture by fleeing through a secret passage. Accounts from eyewitnesses, such as the Roman diarist Marcello Alberini, paint a horrifying picture of the devastation. The sack of Rome was not just a military disaster, it was a profound diplomatic humiliation for the papacy and a stark demonstration of Charles V's overwhelming power. Clement VII remained a virtual prisoner in Castel Sant'Angelo for months, finally surrendering to the imperial forces. He was forced to pay an enormous ransom and concede significant territories to the emperor. This was the lowest point of his pontificate, a complete diplomatic defeat. The balance of power in Italy had irrevocably shifted in favor of Charles V. Letters from Clement during his captivity reveal his desperation and profound sense of betrayal by his former allies, who had largely abandoned him. Despite this crushing defeat, Clement VII, with remarkable resilience, began to rebuild his diplomatic standing. He had no choice but to reconcile with Charles V. In 1529, the Treaty of Barcelona was signed, formally bringing Clement back into the imperial fold. The treaty, meticulously documented in historical archives, saw the emperor promise to restore the Medici to power in Florence, which had seized the opportunity of the sack of Rome to declare itself a republic once again. In return, Clement promised to crown Charles V as emperor. The crowning of Charles V by Clement VII in Bologna in 1530 was a symbolic moment of profound significance. It was the last time a Holy Roman Emperor was crowned by a pope, signifying the emperor's dominance over the papacy and indeed over Italy. The Florentine Republic, which had defied the emperor and the pope, was then besieged by imperial forces with Clement's backing. After a brutal siege, Florence fell in 1530, and the Medici were restored to power, initially under Alessandro de' Medici, who became the Duke of Florence. This was a key demand of Clement VII, a personal and familial diplomatic success amidst broader losses. Clement VII's later years saw him attempt to mend fences and consolidate power where he could. He played a crucial role in negotiating the marriage of his niece, Catherine de' Medici, to the future King Henri II of France, a strategic alliance aimed at balancing imperial power and securing the Medici's long-term dynastic ambitions. This marriage, a significant diplomatic achievement, would prove to be one of the most enduring legacies of Clement's papacy, a powerful example of Medici influence stretching far beyond the Papal States. Clement VII's papacy was a dramatic display of high-stakes diplomacy, shifting alliances, and catastrophic miscalculations, ultimately demonstrating the fragility of even the most powerful spiritual authority in the face of overwhelming temporal power. The sack of Rome stood as a stark monument to the perils of the diplomatic game. Number 2, Pope Leo X's papacy, indulgences, empires, and the spark of Reformation. The year is 1513. Rome bursts with jubilation. Giovanni de' Medici, son of Lorenzo the Magnificent, has been elected pope, taking the name Leo X. This was the ultimate triumph for the Medici family, solidifying their power and influence on a global stage. Leo X, accustomed to the cultural splendor and political intrigue of Florence, brought a new level of extravagance and artistic patronage to the Vatican. His pontificate, however, would be less remembered for its artistic renaissance and more for the diplomatic storms he navigated, particularly the burgeoning Reformation. Leo X inherited a papal state that was a player in the volatile Italian wars, caught between the two great powers of Europe, the ambitious young King Francis, the First of France, and the rising star Charles V, who would soon inherit the crowns of Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, and vast lands in the New World. Leo X's primary diplomatic objective was to maintain the independence and prestige of the Papal States, and, naturally, to further the interests of the Medici family. He pursued a policy of constantly shifting alliances, attempting to prevent any single power from dominating Italy. Initially, he aligned with Emperor Maximilian I in Spain against France, hoping to drive the French out of Italy. This diplomatic move saw some success, with French forces pushed back. However, the unexpected ascension of Francis I to the French throne in 1515, a dynamic and ambitious young king, quickly altered the diplomatic landscape. King Francis I immediately asserted France's claims in Italy, leading to the decisive Battle of Marignano in 1515, where the French decisively defeated the Swiss mercenaries fighting for Milan and the papacy. This was a major setback for Leo X's diplomatic strategy. Faced with a powerful French presence in Italy, Leo X, ever pragmatic, swiftly pivoted. He met Francis I in Bologna, where they signed the Concordat of Bologna in 1516. This agreement, a masterpiece of papal diplomacy, effectively ended the pragmatic sanction of Bourges, which had limited papal authority over the French Church. In return for acknowledging the French king's right to nominate bishops and abbots, Leo X regained significant spiritual control over the French Church and secured the French withdrawal from some papal territories. This was a complex diplomatic compromise, a strategic retreat that secured long-term papal influence over the French Church. Records for the papal chancellery detail the painstaking negotiations and the political concessions made on both sides. The election of a new Holy Roman Emperor in 1519 was another critical diplomatic juncture. The main contenders were Francis I of France, Henry VIII of England, and the young Archduke Charles of Austria, who already ruled Spain. Leo X, deeply concerned about the immense power either Francis or Charles would wield if they also gained the imperial crown, subtly tried to influence the election. He initially favored a less powerful candidate, perhaps even a German prince, to maintain a balance of power. However, through clever maneuvering and vast sums of money, Charles of Austria secured the imperial election, becoming Charles V. This was a significant diplomatic defeat for Leo X, as it created a superpower that would increasingly overshadow the papacy. Letters from Leo X to his cardinal nephews in Germany express his alarm at the prospect of Charles V's election. As Charles V's power grew, Leo X found himself increasingly at odds with him, particularly over territories in northern Italy like Parma and Piacenza, which both the Pope and the Emperor coveted. Leo X once again switched alliances, siding with Charles V against Francis I in the Italian Wars in 1521. This was a tactical move to secure territories for the Papal States and to prevent French dominance in Italy. This alliance led to the reconquest of Milan from the French, a significant victory for the Papal imperial forces. Contemporary chronicles celebrate this victory as a sign of papal strength. However, Leo X's diplomatic efforts were not limited to the grand game of empires. He also had to contend with an unforeseen challenge that emerged from the heart of the Holy Roman Empire, the Protestant Reformation. In 1517, a relatively unknown German monk named Martin Luther published his 95 Theses, criticizing the sale of indulgences, a practice widely used to fund papal projects, including the rebuilding of St. Peter's Basilica. The sale of indulgences was a major source of papal income and a central plank of Leo X's financial and artistic agenda. Leo X's initial diplomatic response to Luther was one of underestimation. He viewed Luther as a troublesome friar whose theological arguments could be easily dismissed. His legates and nuncios in Germany were tasked with dealing with Luther, initially through persuasion, then through threats. The diplomatic correspondence from Rome to Germany from 1518 to 1520 shows a gradual escalation of concern as Luther's ideas gained traction. Cardinal Cajetan, the papal legate sent to Augsburg in 1518, attempted to secure Luther's recantation, but their meeting ended in a stalemate. The detailed reports from Cajetan back to Rome highlight Luther's stubbornness and the growing support he commanded among some German princes and intellectuals. As Luther's challenge grew, Leo X issued the papal bull Exsurge Domine in 1520, condemning Luther's teachings and demanding his recantation within 60 days. This was a powerful diplomatic statement, an ultimatum from the spiritual leader of Christendom. When Luther publicly burned the bull, it became clear that a diplomatic solution was no longer possible. The matter then shifted to the secular authority of the emperor. At the Diet of Worms, in 1521, Charles V, fulfilling his duty as Holy Roman Emperor, issued the Edict of Worms, declaring Luther an outlaw. This was a result of intense diplomatic pressure from Leo X and his representatives, who pushed for the full weight of imperial authority to be brought against Luther. The records of the Diet of Worms show the strong papal influence on the emperor's decision. Leo X died suddenly in December 1521, his papacy marked by both strategic diplomatic triumphs and profound unforeseen challenges. He had successfully maintained papal influence in Italy and skillfully navigated the complex web of European power politics, securing territories and alliances. However, his ultimate diplomatic failure lay in his inability to comprehend the true nature of the challenge posed by Luther. He treated it as a theological dispute that could be resolved through traditional church channels and papal decrees, rather than recognizing it as a fundamental challenge to papal authority that would fracture Christendom and unleash centuries of religious and political upheaval. His legacy, therefore, is a complex tapestry of Medici ambition, Renaissance splendor, and the unwitting ignition of the Reformation, a fire that no amount of diplomatic skill could extinguish. Number 1. Lorenzo de' Medici's desperate gamble in Naples. The year is 1479. Florence, the jewel of the Renaissance, is in dire straits. Barely a year before, in 1478, the city had been rocked by the Pazzi conspiracy, a brutal assassination attempt against Lorenzo and his brother Giuliano de' Medici during Mass in the Duomo. Giuliano was murdered, but Lorenzo, despite being wounded, survived. The conspiracy, orchestrated by the rival Pazzi family, with the direct backing of Pope Sixtus IV and the support of Ferdinand I, the formidable King of Naples had failed in its primary goal of removing the Medici from power. However, its aftermath plunged Florence into a devastating war. Pope Sixtus IV, furious at the failure of the conspiracy and the Florentine government's retaliatory execution of many conspirators, including members of the Pazzi family and the Archbishop of Pisa, excommunicated Lorenzo and the entire city of Florence. He then formed a powerful alliance with King Ferdinand of Naples and Siena, launching a full-scale invasion of Florentine territory. Florence, a wealthy city but not a military powerhouse, found itself isolated, its traditional allies such as Milan and Venice offering little effective help. The war dragged on for nearly 2 years, draining Florence's treasury, crippling its trade, and causing immense hardship for its people. The Florentine archives from this period are filled with desperate appeals for funds and reports of military setbacks. Lorenzo, known as the Magnificent, was the undisputed ruler of Florence. He was a brilliant patron of the arts, a cunning politician, but he was not a military commander. He understood that a prolonged war would lead to the ruin of Florence and the downfall of his family. His military advisors offered grim assessments. Florence could not win this war through force. The only path forward was diplomacy, but with the Pope as his sworn enemy and Naples actively invading, the odds seemed impossible. In late 1479, Lorenzo made a breathtakingly bold decision, a gamble that shocked his own advisors and the courts of Europe. He decided to travel to Naples, the heart of his enemy's kingdom, to negotiate directly with King Ferdinand. This was an act of extraordinary personal diplomacy, a move fraught with immense danger. But Ferdinand was a ruthless ruler known for his treachery. Many believed Lorenzo would be imprisoned, or worse, executed. But Lorenzo, according to contemporary Florentine chroniclers like Niccolo Machiavelli in his Florentine histories, saw no other choice. It was a desperate move for a desperate situation. On December 6, 1479, Lorenzo secretly boarded a galley in Livorno and set sail for Naples. He left behind a city filled with anxiety and uncertainty, his trusted lieutenants governing in his absence. His arrival in Naples was met with a mix of suspicion and awe. He was, after all, the man whom King Ferdinand had been trying to destroy for years. Ferdinand, a seasoned and cynical monarch, was initially wary. He invited Lorenzo to his court, where the two men engaged in intense, face-to-face negotiations that lasted for several weeks. Lorenzo's diplomatic strategy was not based on military strength, but on persuasion, charm, and a keen understanding of Ferdinand's own interests. He argued that a prolonged war in Italy only benefited external powers and weakened the Italian states themselves. He appealed to Ferdinand's desire for stability and peace, and his ambition to be seen as a wise and powerful ruler, not just a brutal one. He also subtly reminded Ferdinand that a completely weakened Florence might make Naples too powerful, upsetting the delicate balance of power in Italy and inviting intervention from other European rulers. Letters from Lorenzo himself, sent back to Florence during his time in Naples, describe the arduous nature of these discussions, portraying a masterful display of rhetoric and persistence. The exact details of their private conversations are lost to history, but the outcome was undeniable. After nearly 3 months of intense negotiation, Lorenzo secured a peace treaty with Ferdinand. In March 1480, Lorenzo returned to Florence, not as a prisoner, but as a hero. The terms of the treaty included the withdrawal of Neapolitan troops from Florentine territory, a mutual defense pact, and a return to normal relations. This was a staggering diplomatic victory, achieved through personal courage and brilliant negotiation. The peace with Naples, however, did not immediately end the war with Pope Sixtus IV. The Pope remained hostile and refused to lift the excommunication. But Lorenzo's diplomatic triumph had subtly shifted the balance of power. With Naples out of the war, the Pope found himself increasingly isolated. Furthermore, the Ottomans under Sultan Mehmed II suddenly landed a massive invasion force in Otranto in southern Italy, in July 1480. This unexpected event changed everything. Sixtus IV, terrified by the prospect of a full-scale Ottoman invasion of Italy, needed to consolidate Christian forces. He reluctantly agreed to make peace with Florence, finally lifting the excommunication in December 1480. He urgently needed Ferdinand of Naples to focus on the Ottoman threat, and Ferdinand would not do so without peace with Florence. Lorenzo's desperate gamble in Naples, therefore, not only saved Florence from ruin, but also dramatically altered the geopolitical landscape of Italy. It demonstrated the power of personal diplomacy and Lorenzo's unparalleled skill as a negotiator. He had faced his greatest enemy, risked everything, and emerged victorious, preserving Florence's independence and solidifying the Medici's rule for another generation. This daring mission stands as one of the most remarkable feats of diplomacy in an era defined by conflict and cunning, a testament to how one man's courage and intellect could change the course of history.